Hello and welcome to WPP BAV Best Countries 2022. My name's David Roth and I'm the CEO of the Store WPP and Chairman of BAV. This study is our fullest and most comprehensive yet. I'm in our studio in London, but the very nature of power across the world is changing. So I'll be travelling virtually right across the globe in order to analyse the movements we see in the just released 2022 study and rankings, reflecting with my guests on where it takes us on the big questions the world and business face, and how countries are seen in this complex and fast-changing world. Now, the attitude of global business leaders, opinion formers and citizens towards nation strengths have changed dramatically in recent years, never more so than in 2022, and we'll be looking at how these changing values have impacted overall perceptions of our 85 nations covered in the 2022 study. And yes, the 2022 study has brought us a new overall BAV Best Country. And I'll be revealing who that is later in the broadcast. As we take this journey together, I'll be talking to experts who'll give us contextual insights to help us frame the findings, economic, cultural and social. And I'll also let you know how to find out more about the study and how to download and experience our BAV Best Countries metaverse. Now, the next hour promises to be informative, challenging, stimulating and, I hope, fun. So let's get started. How a country is viewed around the world is of huge importance, politically, economically and socially. It has the ability to contribute to both a nation's hard and soft power. The Romans understood this well. SPQR, an abbreviation for Centanus Populosque Romanus, was arguably the first country branding. It was an emblematic, abbreviated phrase referring to the government of the ancient Roman Republic. You only needed to see the emblem, and invaded countries knew exactly what was in store for them. So country branding itself is not new, but measuring it is. Now, in our 7th year, the WPP BAV Annual Best Countries Rankings measures global perceptions of countries against a series of characteristics, impressions that have the potential to drive trade, travel and investment. They also directly affect brands. The study was developed by WPP BAV, the Wharton Business School of the University of Pennsylvania and US News. The ranking is based on a large global survey which asks a range of people about how they perceive different countries against a range of key attributes. Country branding also has a significant impact on corporate and product brands. The words "made in" can instantly lend credibility and trust to a product or brand that a consumer hasn't previously encountered. That could be enough to convince someone to buy and, beyond that, convince them to pay a premium. Likewise, "made in" can prove an instant turn-off if a consumer associates the country of origin with poor safety standards or sees it as being behind the times on social issues or workers' rights. But it's not just a one-way reaction. The perceptions and performance of brands abroad feed back into the development of the country itself. Additionally, willingness for corporates to invest vital FDI is also closely linked to the strength of a country's brand. As local brands and businesses succeed, they generate economic growth as well as lending further positive associations to their country's brand. There's a close relationship between how people feel about a country and their attitudes towards the brand they associate with that country. Strong countries fuel strong brands and vice versa. Think of France and Chanel. Both represent elegance, glamour, and prestige. Chanel is intrinsically French, and France is synonymous with Chanel. The same can be said of Italy and Ferrari, or Japan and Sony. In each case, brands and the countries are part of a virtuous circle, a symbiotic relationship. In fact, Germany is a really fine example of this symbiosis in action. Germany has come to represent the qualities of durability and engineering that brands like Bosch, BMW, Audi, and Mercedes have shown the world that Germany can deliver. Brands can both shape and be shaped by the perceptions of their country of origins. Japan in the 1970s was known as a cheap manufacturing base, but now respected as a world leader for quality electronics and also technology, thanks largely to brands like Sony and Toyota. South Korea has taken a similar path, with Samsung and Hyundai demonstrating to the entire world what modern South Korea is and is doing, so creating consumer predisposition in international markets that favour other South Korean brands. There's a two-way reaction and a multiplier effect for both. This year's study quantifies the impact. We see that 83% of consumers globally agree that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. 78% also agree that the country a product is made in impacts my preference to purchase it. Our annual Best Countries ranking was first launched in 2016 at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, the world's largest gathering of global leaders and heads of industry and influence. It's now in its 7th year, and given how turbulent the past 7 years have been across the globe, enables us to see the impact of the changes. The Best Country ranking incorporates the views of close to 18,000 individual members of the public and business decision makers, surveyed in 85 countries across the world. This year's survey was completed in mid-2022. Collectively, the 85 countries in the 2022 rankings account for about 95% of global gross domestic product per capita and represent 80% of the world's population. Individuals surveyed for Best Countries were asked how closely they associated 73 attributes with a range of countries. These attributes were then grouped into 10 categories that were used to calculate the Best Countries ranking, and more on those attributes later. So come with me as we meet our first guests on our interview stage. Well, I'd now like to introduce you all to Eric Gertler. Eric is the Executive Chairman of US News. Eric, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and frankly, without whose partnership we really wouldn't be here today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you, and I have to say, we've been collaborating now, I think, for about 7 years, and it's just wonderful to partner with WPP and BAV and see how well the U.S. News Best Countries study has been growing in depth and ambition and significance.
Well, let's go back to basics, Eric, for a moment, which is, in a sense, what is the value of rankings per se, and country rankings in particular?
Well, I think that's a great question. You know, rankings are very valuable because they allow you to measure where you are. And if you don't know how you're doing, you can improve. Now, with respect to countries, we all know that we live in an interconnected world, in a world where countries have different expertises, specialties, focus, they make different investments. So it's really critical to use the rankings as a means of measuring and understanding those differences in countries in what we know is becoming an increasingly globalized and interconnected world.
I mean, reputations are phenomenally delicate, none more so than I suppose in today's era of misrepresentation, poor reporting that we see. How important is integrity as a backbone to any ranking, Eric?
Integrity is critical to the backbone of any ranking, and we know it's critical to everything. You can spend a lifetime building a reputation and then lose it overnight. So integrity and trust is absolutely critical. And in our case, we have been doing rankings for 40 years. We've developed credibility as those who take rankings seriously. We invest heavily in the data, we invest heavily in the information, and we invest heavily in the journalism that we provide as part of the rankings. We also make sure that we partner with very credible companies. So in this case, to be able to partner with WPP, and BAV ensures that our credibility is at another is taken to an even higher level. There is so much information out there that is not credible. We make sure as a journalistic entity to be fact-based, incredibly reliant on data, well-sourced information, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our consumers who are using these rankings, we understand that they're using that information to make important decisions in their lives. So our rankings need to be credible because they're critical to important decision making.
Now, Eric, when you take a sort of a longer term view of our rankings over our 7 years of partnership, what would you say the overriding contribution that the ranking has made to both companies and to governments around the world?
Well, when we think of our rankings, we think of our rankings as a tool to measure yourself. You don't know how you're doing, and you don't know how you're improving unless there's a baseline from which you are being measured. And from that, you can then assess comparisons, in this case, to other countries. And so when governments and policymakers are making investments, they want to know how those investments have paid off. They want to know whether or not they're spending their time and their capital in a way that's actually improving their country, and certainly in a way that they're intending to do so. The rankings help to put an eye on whether or not that's actually happening. How are they doing in terms of traveling? Are more people coming to visit? How is the infrastructure doing? Is the infrastructure improving? How is trade going? All of that comes together in the rankings and all the detail that we provide. So I think it's very important to help policymakers understand how well they're doing.
Eric Ertler, Chief Executive of US News, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. As you say, it has been a great collaboration, and we're looking forward to many more years of working together. So thank you.
Well, inflation is top of mind for governments, politicians, businesses, and of course us as consumers, as it is, I'm sure, for our next guest, Vicky Price. Hi, Vicky. Thanks very much indeed. Vicky is the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre of Economics and Business Research in London, and of course the former joint head of the United Kingdom's Government Economic Services. Vicky, thanks indeed for joining us. Now, Vicky, the last time we physically met was just before lockdown. In fact, it was like about a few hours before everything closed down. And literally, things were being locked down as we were walking down the street.
Well, we were, I think, the only people in this
restaurant. I think we were, yes. Yeah.
And we sort of braved it and just met. It was really good.
And it was difficult to be optimistic then. Now, are you an optimist or a pessimist of what the next few years are going to bring us all from a global perspective?
Well, I despair sometimes about politicians taking too long to come up with some of the solutions or to see what they really need to do to get us over the period we're in. Because what really matters is consumer confidence and also business confidence. And in terms of at least getting the economy going, I think it's realised that something needs to happen. Sometimes it just takes too long. I think so. I'm happy about government intervention in various areas, but why do we have to go through this and not react it earlier? For example, not just here, but across the world as well, that is an issue. And the start nature of some of the interventions is really, really negative. So we should be very careful about that. So in this country, if you just think about the whole COVID period, there was no certainty that the furlough scheme would carry on for, I don't know, whatever period, and then it would stop, then it would start again, and you wouldn't know until the night before, after you had fired everybody, for example, whether the scheme would be reinstated. So it wasn't ideal. In other countries, they said, right, we're going to have this furlough scheme for the next year. So at least you have some certainty in terms of what you were doing. So there is a little bit of that. So this communication to business and this understanding what the business needs are. I think we certainly in the UK spent some time with business really divorced from government understanding what the issues were. And feeling so disenfranchised as a business or community is not good for growth. I think we've got over that. At least I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we have. I think there is a lot more attempt to find a solution to the long-term issues now, forced by the realities of not having the cheap gas that was coming in from Russia. And I think a lot of the growth models were built on this, which now prove to be wrong. We see what's going on in Germany, for example, right now. Rethinking, did we do it right? Did we invest sufficiently? Should we have been more self-sufficient? All that sort of stuff should have been thought about before, but also what the implications for climate change are of the way in which we were carrying on at the time. So I'm optimistic that some of these things that have happened now are forcing us to rethink the model. And I think COVID forced us to rethink the model. And all this complete obsession with tightening your fiscal side, all the pain caused on my native Greece by the Stability and Growth Pact and all these bailouts and seeing GDP reduced by 25%, which still has hardly recovered. If we had had COVID before the financial crisis, then I think the financial crisis outcomes would have been better as well for everybody. So I think we've learned in a painful way. So there is rethinking going on about how we run Europe, for example, and what we do here as well. And this link between government and business and the consumer or households, which now is becoming clearer. I think the interdependencies are really great there, and ideology shouldn't be trumping everything else. I think what we're seeing now is that perhaps the whole system will be rethought, and we just have to put up, if you like, with the government having a bigger role, but the government will also be part of the solution alongside businesses.
Well, I really hope that what we don't see around the world is people taking their foot off the accelerator in climate change, because I think that will have a sort of a significant detrimental impact. So I certainly hope that won't happen. You've given us some hope. Vicky Price, it's been a pleasure as ever. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Historically, military power and finance, banks and tanks were the attributes against which we measured a country's power in the world. Not anymore. So what does all this mean? It shows that a nation focused on providing great quality of life for its people, which cares about the rights and equality, and has a focus on entrepreneurship, is seen as having the most powerful nation brand. This reflects a world today and the factors that influence public perceptions and consumer decision-making, and by implication, a nation's political policy-making. So let's take a look at those 10 factors and their weights for 2022. Entrepreneurship, 14.2%. Cultural influence, 10.4%. Power, 5%. Heritage, 3.1%. Adventure, 5.5%. Quality of life, 14.5%. Open for business, 9.3%. Social purpose, 13.5%. Agility, 14%. Movers, 10.6%. So it's clearly no longer just tanks and banks that give a country influence around the world. Softer power, which comes about as a result of entrepreneurship and cultural exports, is increasingly making an impact. But before we reveal the overall best country for 2022, let's look at 3 countries that have performed well across some of those highly weighted factors. Looking at agility, America really does lead the field. A nation seen as open to change and adaptable, quick to respond with America's enduring pioneering spirit. A major force in its dynamic, innovative, and highly progressive manufacturing base. And entrepreneurship, Germany is a nation still brimful of ideas and technological expertise, with a highly skilled labour force, global connectivity, and, importantly, easy access to capital to support its smart and innovative businesses. Looking for adventure? Head to Brazil. Tourism is increasing year on year, a growing role on the international business stage, and manufacturing and exports at record highs. So just 3 examples of how the individual factors bring us insights for individual countries. Please don't forget to go to the WPP BAV Metaverse experience to find out more. But now it's time for us to reveal who the WPP BAV Best Countries 2022 Best Country is. Well, I'm thrilled and delighted to be joined by the Ambassador, His Excellency the Ambassador for Switzerland to the United Kingdom. Ambassador, congratulations on Switzerland being the #1 country in our this year's brand study.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and it's a great honor to be the winner of your study.
Well, I think it's really intriguing, Ambassador, because when you look at the relative size of Switzerland compared to the size of many other countries in the WPP BAV Best Countries for 2022, Switzerland is relatively small, but it's clearly punching above its weight. How does it do that?
Well, I think, we are a country that is strategically placed, I would think, in the heart of Europe. But we're a country without any resources, maybe except for water. And so from early on, we understood we have to invest in people, invest in know-how in terms of innovation and research, and invest in trade, becoming a trade country. I think these are the features that are very much present today as they were 100 or 200 years ago. And so this is something we continuously strengthen in terms of our framework conditions. We want to be a place that is attractive for the people, for the companies. We have tried to provide a sound infrastructure for the people, but again, for all the setup, sound public finances. So in the end, as a package, we very much try to be this country, to live up to this cliche that many people have of Switzerland as the country of chocolate, cheese, and watches. And this cliche is still true, but
there's nothing wrong with that.
This is absolutely. This is the 19th century. By now, we are the 21st century. Switzerland has become the most innovative country according to the statistics, and that's something. This is not a coincidence. This is a lot of investment that goes into this.
Now, I think one of the curious and interesting things is that Switzerland tops the factors when you look at open for business, but it also does exceptionally well and a great place to live. You would have thought those two sort of dimensions are diametrically opposed. How Switzerland managed to square those two things together when many other countries haven't managed to do that?
Well, for us, I think it's not a contradiction. We feel very much goes together. Yes, we're an open economy. At the same time, it is important that we have a political stability. Switzerland is a very diverse country in terms of religion, in terms of backgrounds, in terms of languages. So we have been very much looking into stability within our country to be open to the world. And this then means if you're open to business, you attract interesting business, but you have a lifestyle that is attractive as well for business to come to Switzerland. We have seen with many managers who are saying we want to send children to school in Switzerland. This is attractive as a place to open business. The framework conditions are not just good for the business, but also for the family. So I think it's important to invest in your infrastructure as such, and I think that's what we did.
Now, Switzerland has long been known for, I suppose, its artisan values and skills. The watch industry, probably the best example. Looking to the future, where is the skill set that Switzerland has that's going to power it over the course of the next decade?
Well, I think we should start where we are and where our traditional strengths lie. And I think if you mentioned the watch industry, I think it's a perfect example of how we developed these elements from the watch industry, the reliability, the precision, the microtechnology, and used it for other areas like the medtech area. So we felt a lot of medical instruments today developed in Switzerland are based on know-how that we use in the watch industry. Or areas where we traditionally good in terms of financial industry, if you look at the developments of our fintech industry or sustainable finance as we move to implement the Paris Agreement objectives. These are areas we are looking at also to make a step ahead in terms of the financial services, looking at the blockchain industry. There's a blockchain valley in Switzerland. So these are areas that are based on where we're coming from. And obviously a major area in terms of innovation, a major driver of innovation is the whole life science area where we attach a lot of importance and there is a lot of know-how. And as I said, a lot of innovation power.
And how important is the sustainability thread that runs through all of what you've just talked about?
Oh, absolutely. This is absolutely key for us. We have an important clean tech sector that is growing, that is based as well on an infrastructure, very much say on public transport. Switzerland has the longest railway tunnel in the world because we want to put the lorries on the rail. And being a central country in Europe, we want to have the transport not on the road, but rather on the rail. That's already, say, a start. We have some of the cleanest lakes in the world. That's something that is dear to us. So on this basis, we have developed a clean tech industry with a great potential.
Now, your diplomatic career has taken you to many countries all over the world. How would you sort of define, from your perspective, the United Kingdom at the moment in what is now the post-Elizabethan age and a Brexit era?
For us, obviously, we're following the UK's path very closely. We see that the UK still now, after Brexit, is taking over more of this task that were delegated before to Brussels. And we see a big interest in Switzerland to see what Switzerland is doing, has been doing outside of the European Union, how we have been arranging our relations with the European Union. And we're very open to this exchange and this exchange of experience. We see a lot of opportunities as well in terms of the cooperation between our financial centers, trade and services, cooperation in science and technology. So we see also the opportunities in this time. So we were actually looking at this in a very optimistic way.
Well, Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for allowing us into your home. Congratulations again to Switzerland for being the number one best countries in the WPP BAV Best Countries study for 2022. But for the moment, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for the award. We're very much looking forward to this. Thank you.
Well, from the Swiss Embassy in the UK to Switzerland itself, I'm really glad to be able to welcome to this section of the programme Andreas, the CEO of Group M for Switzerland, and our country manager, Jonathan, the CEO of Ogilvy, and Giselle, the co-CEO and Chief Operating Officer of Wunderman Thompson. A very warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Andreas, let's start with you because you're actually new to working in Switzerland.
Exactly.
We've seen what the study says about Switzerland. What are your first impressions?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this interview. I have the luck to be since I think 1 month CEO of Group M in Switzerland. And to be honest, my first impression, I was very surprised coming to Switzerland, and it's a sort of a feeling, and the feeling is that there's on the one side there's a very strong national pride, which ends up in sort of Swissness, which is very important for everybody in Switzerland. This term Swissness, but on the other side, it goes really well with being open-minded and very integrative.
So I'm intrigued because Switzerland performs really well on quality of life. And yet, from our observations, Switzerland is an amazingly hard-working nation. How do those things sort of gel with each other?
Yeah, I would say we are a little bit biased in the end, but you're absolutely right. We are a hard-working nation, and that's absolutely true. For example, some years ago, we even had the opportunity to vote for 6 weeks holidays, and we decided against because we always have our economics somewhere in our head and can't get over it, honestly. So we're really a working nation, I would say, to us. But I think the opposite, some of the key Swiss characteristics are, as well as already Andreas just mentioned, we are quite integrative. And that comes also along when we have, for example, friendships or relationships. They're always quite fast, quite deep. And like if you get a Swiss person to become your friend, you will keep him forever. Gives the balance to each other. So though we are hardworking, we stick to the rules. Therefore, we have a lot in common and have a lot of opportunities when we have free time to enjoy ourselves, because you can go out, you can go everywhere without any fear or something, and you can stick to good relations.
So positive proof you can work hard and have a good quality of life. Jonathan, we've heard in the programme so far, and we're going to hear some more a little bit later on, about some of those sort of macroeconomic trends. One of them is inflation. But on inflation in particular, it appears at the moment that Switzerland is bucking the world trend on inflation. How's that possible?
Well, yes, that's true and not true. So on the one hand, we have what I heard now in August, a 3.5% inflation, which is compared to the rest of Europe or the rest of the world is very low. Nevertheless, looking at the Swiss numbers of the inflation in the last 6 years, they were always around 0.1, 0.2%. So for Swiss relations, it's actually quite hard or quite a tough inflation. I would say that's basically mainly due to the stability of the economy. We do have a very low unemployment rate of currently 2%, which then, of course, macroeconomically seen is beautiful. Microeconomically, it's a bit of a problem being a CEO and needing to hire people, because it's actually really going into an employee market, which makes hiring quite difficult.
Obviously, we've heard about the interrelationship between the nation brand and brands that originate from individual countries. What's your perspective on Swiss brands?
I would say we have a really good perception everywhere. So that's something that's really a quality of us. Not only to mention our great cheese chocolate and as well the watch industry, which made us famous all over the world, specifically in the Asian market. So all that origins from Switzerland always comes along with the great aspect of high quality, I would say.
Well, Andreas, Jonathan, Giselle, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And once again, congratulations to Switzerland for being the BAV Best Countries 2022. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to be joined now by Arthur Fleischmann, who is the WPP Country Manager for Canada. Arthur, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Arthur, how would you define the country brand of Canada?
Well, I was born in the States, so I have a little bit of objectivity, although I've lived here now for the bulk of my life. So I'll give you my perception, and then we'll chat a bit about what the research tells us. I guess Canadians are not always top of mind outside of Canada, and living in the States, I don't think I could have even told you where Toronto was as a child. And I think that's sort of true to the Canadian brand. We tend to fly a bit below the radar. We tend to be a little bit of an underdog, and we wear that underdog chip on our shoulder a little bit. But maybe that's a good thing because it makes us a little feisty. But when you think of Canada, you think of us as friendly, honest, trustworthy, very clean, very nice people. And I think the research backs that up. Those are the traits that seem to come through: progressive, beautiful nature, very, very clean, and really a great place to live because of our progressive values and quality of life.
Arthur, it's interesting when you actually have a look at the dimensions that Canada don't do so well in. It's dimensions like sort of movers and up and coming. Is Canada hiding its light under a bushel?
Yeah, in fact, we're decidedly not sexy. I sort of think we're a very comfortable hiking boot or something like that. We're not known as up and comers, as having big impact culturally on the world. I think it's interesting. We don't have industries like or big brands like Google and Microsoft and Tesla that define us to the world. We don't have the Sony that define Japan, or Louis Vuitton and luxury brands that might define if not France, certainly Paris. That being said, we have been ranked as 3 of the top most livable cities on Forbes top 10 list this year. And I think The Economist had a similar list, and also same thing, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary score in the top 10. So we are a bit of a well-kept secret. We're not known as up and coming, but those who look at the actual data, healthcare and education and quality of life and jobs market, we are actually right in the top 10, 3 of the top 10 in the world. So
is there a job for Canada to do, Arthur, in being slightly more upfront about its values and its benefits?
Well, I guess it goes back to the brief, doesn't it, David? If the strategy is to stay under the radar, then no, there's no job to be done. But if we want to be well known, I think we should be well known for the substance of what Canada offers, which is the opportunity, the stable jobs market, the stable economy. We did not see the same degree of downturn during the 2008 catastrophe because our banking regulations are far more stringent. And so the things that make us maybe a little less sexy, a little less up and coming, are actually the things, I believe, that make us one of the most desirable countries in the world to live, and probably the reason I came here.
Arthur Fleischmann, WPP Country Manager for Canada, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, David.
And in number 2 place for this year's BAV Best Countries 2022 study is Germany. And I'm very glad to be joined by Karen Ross, the CEO of Group M in Germany. Karen, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for having me.
So a great achievement for Germany with a jump to second place after, I suppose, 5 years or so, in the third or fourth spots. Germany has a long sort of prided itself on being a financial powerhouse, but a lot of change has also been going on in terms of social purpose and quality of life. So what cultural changes do you sense are taking place in Germany today?
You're completely right. There's a lot going on, and certainly there are quite some trends which had a big acceleration over the past 2-3 years based on COVID, to be honest, as well, which is not surprising, like a bigger focus on health, on well-being, work-life balance, but also like purpose, meaningful work, and all that kind of things, of course. And it also, I think it gave us more self-consciousness as well, and which was there before the pandemic already, like pretty much triggered by Gen Z, but not only, a bigger focus on sustainability, on our planet, on doing the right thing. And you may think, well, that's kind of not unique to Germany. These trends did occur over the past years, but actually in Germany, this clashed together with the old traditional values in Germany, like efficiency, like contributing to economic values, and all that kind of stuff. And that's really causing quite a big change.
Well, of course, one of the other big dimensions where Germany does particularly well this year is entrepreneurship. How do you sort of see the whole area of entrepreneurship contributing to how Germany is seen?
I think that entrepreneurship and like great engineering was always something Germany was famous for. But currently I see this is getting to a like more modern view of those dimensions, like a very clear startup culture. There's a lot of happening in Germany, not only in our hotspot Berlin. It's very much supported by the society. It's supported by the government as well. But I think even more than this, it's really, while we are coming from being great engineers, being very detailed engineers, being maybe over-engineered sometimes. And I mean the very, to everybody, famous German bureaucracy, which was not always a good thing to have, to be honest. And when I think of companies in Germany, of businesses, for example, I think there's just pick one, which is a great example, which is Deutsche Telekom. So this company was born from the privatization of actually the German Federal Post, and at the beginning was really perceived as being, heavy loaded, very complex, not very consumer friendly, let's say old-fashioned, and they came all the way along in their transformation, of course, with their whole business, with their product and services, but also with their brand and how they are perceived. And now Deutsche Telekom is really very, very modern. It's very purpose-driven. It's very human. It's client-centric. It's driving change and digitalization and connecting people for the better in Germany. So they are well deserved, one of the really top employers in Germany, for example, with a great reputation and successfully worldwide, by the way.
Well, Karen Ross, the CEO of Group M in Germany, congratulations on the number 2 position in this year's study. Maybe next year, number 1. But Karen, for the moment, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted now to be joined by Dr. Stacey Graham, who is the Global Racial Equity Programs Director at WPP. Stacey, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
This year we see social purpose becoming significantly important, which is a good thing. Why do you think that's so?
I believe in the survey you define social purpose around a few categories, such as caring about gender and racial equity, the environment, human rights, and so forth, right? And what we understand about humans is we have an innate desire to have a reason for being. That's another word for purpose. So I'd say if we look at what's happened in the world in the last 2.5, 3 years, that is definitely catapulted into the mainstream. We have all these things coming together that are pinpointing, illustrating how we're failing as a collective.
And do you think that failure as a collective is something that's now being exposed right across the globe?
Absolutely. I would say that even before 2020, we could see it happening, but there's something about a restriction of freedom of movement, right, that makes people sit at home and have nothing else to do but recognize and look into everything that's wrong with the world, if you will. And so I think that it's on people's minds. What does it mean to be in the collective when I'm sitting at home and can't leave my house anymore? What does it mean to really be connected as a society? How do we care for the most vulnerable? And to be really honest, with COVID-19, we didn't do a great job of that. So I think people are asking different questions than they were 2 to 3 years ago.
And I think I found it quite interesting to see the relationship between this movement, I mean, let's call it a movement, coming from the population upwards.
Absolutely. I mean, we also see that some of our health officials do move more politically than we would have expected. But there were people across the world who made the decision to wear a mask even when it was no longer mandated, who stayed at home even when they didn't want to, who got on the streets for probably the largest social movement since 1968, right? It was a global social movement to bring awareness to racial inequality. So I think there's a coming together even in times of divisiveness.
Now, one of the things we've seen in the study is this sort of interrelationship between a country's brand and companies' brands, and we're seeing that interrelationship even more sort of mingled and prevalent this year. So what should companies do to improve their social purpose in relation to how their country is seen?
That is a great question. I think that is something that they're still figuring out. But one thing we know for sure is people aren't simply incentivized by money. That's not enough to keep employees today. Employees want to work somewhere where they feel proud of not only the work that they do, but the things that the company stands for. They want to see their company standing up for social issues that they personally care about.
Stacey, why do you think suddenly companies are finding a political voice as opposed to purely a corporate voice?
I think to an extent, we have been able to observe this shift away. When I studied, there was a clear connection. The business strategy has to align with shareholder value. That's all we care about, maximizing shareholder value. And there was a notion that maximizing shareholder value stood in opposition to a social purpose, if you will. And today, I think people are recognizing that's actually not true. And we increase shareholder value when we can ensure that we have high employee engagement, low turnover, and people care about what they do in the company they work for.
Well, Stacey Graham, that's a fantastic place to stop. This whole topic is something that we are all going to have to understand a lot better, and not just understand it, but also ensure that it's actions as opposed to merely words. But for the moment, Dr. Stacey Graham, the Global Racial Equity Programs Director at WPP, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you.
As we've seen, there is but one best country overall. But just as important and significant are the positions for countries on the 10 factors. So let's take a look at the top 2 countries on each factor. For quality of life, Sweden is first and Denmark is second. For entrepreneurship, Germany is first, with the United States second. For agility, first is the United States, with Germany second. For social purpose, first is Sweden, with Germany again second. For movers, first is United Arab Emirates, with Egypt second. For cultural influence, first is Italy, with France second. For open for business, first is Switzerland, with Panama second. For adventure, first is Brazil, with Italy second. For power, first is the United States, with China second. For heritage, first is Italy, with Greece second. They were the top 10, but to see the entire ranking for each factor, just go to the Best Countries Metaverse experience. Well, I'm very glad now to be joined by Professor David Ribstein of the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and a true partner of ours from the very, very start of the Best Countries study. Dave, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I would just like to say the partnership between the Wharton School and yourselves and BAV and US News has been tremendous, and I do thank you very much for all of your help, your support, but probably most of all, your intellect and analysis to help us really understand and make sense of how we organize the data, but also understand what its significance is. Dave, one of the, I suppose, the biggest contributing factors this year to the way in which the results need to be looked through is clearly the war in Ukraine. What's your overall sort of feeling and understanding about the significance of that event, which is clearly still going on today, to the lens that we need to look at Best Studies 2022?
Well, thank you, David, and it's been a real pleasure working with WPP, BAV, and US News. This project has been fascinating, and perhaps this year more than ever, as we have seen more change in the perceptions of countries in the 2022 data than in any previous year. And I think part of that is because of the war in Ukraine. So let's look at some of what it is that we can see in the data this year. First of all, what we know is that the quality of life is the #1 factor determining how people evaluate countries. And that's very clear. And then the other thing that we see is that Switzerland and Germany, both of whom have been leaders in the Best Countries reports in previous years, they've risen again. While there's been some movement in perceptions around the world, the conflict in Ukraine has by far created the greatest impact on changing the world's opinions. I will note that this year we did not collect data from Russia, but we did collect data from surrounding countries. But what I'm going to be sharing with you is perceptions from other countries of both Russia and Ukraine. So let me begin by saying that in 2021, Russia was the 21st ranked country in our data, and Ukraine was ranked number 71. Russia, in the 2022 data, has fallen from number 24 to number 36. And I will note, and you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, that cares about human rights, cares about the environment, it's viewed as corrupt, racial equality, friendly and family friendly, fun and open for business. All Russia is in the bottom 5 of our ranking of 85 countries. That being said, I will note also that Russia remains perceived to be strong in terms of power, technological expertise, has strong exports, athletically talented, actually viewed as a leader, number 2 in the world as a leader, yet unapproachable, very politically influential, and has a strong military. In general, I would say there's a halo effect, that there's a perception about the country which affects all of the dimensions. The greatest shift of any dimension for Russia is the perception about how it is connected to the rest of the world. And previously it was seen as number 30, and now it's seen as number 39. In contrast, when we look at Ukraine, Ukraine has risen from number 71 in the world up to number 62. So the overall attitude of Ukraine has gotten better. They continue to rank poorly on a number of dimensions: economically stable, happy, politically stable, safe. Of course, they're at the very bottom of the list. Good for tourism, not going to happen. And of course, the quality of life during this period of conflict, very, very poor. They've got a series of very positive dimensions: gender equality, strong international alliances, which has become clear. Actually, the perception of their power at number 14 is all of great interest. And when I look at what it is that shifted, the shift has happened primarily in terms of their political influence, their power, and their international alliances. As I look across all the countries, and again, remember 2021, Ukraine was ranked number 71. Now it is that they are up at number 62. Most countries have improved their perception of Ukraine. The one that was most surprising to me is while the conflict has happened between Russia and Ukraine, Poland has risen in the overall rankings from number 43 to number 32. This is the highest overall improvement of any country that we've seen in the 7 years that we've been collecting this data. And as they've opened the doors to refugees, the world thinks more positively about them. And they're ranked positive in terms of affordable, which surprises me, but cares about human rights does not surprise me. Committed to climate change and cares about the environment, they're up there very high. And they're seen as high in terms of being safe and social purpose. And when I look at the countries that are rating Poland, what it is that we see is there's a couple countries that have ranked them lower, but in general, most countries are perceiving them to be much greater. There was a widespread in the perception of Russia and the perception of Ukraine. Here, what it is that we see is a relatively narrow, even the most extreme cases from Vietnam to Egypt, it's 25. That's half of the spread that we saw of Ukraine. And again, here's sort of a summarization of that. The United States ranks Poland number 29. And what we see is, again, some of this spread across the various different countries. And what I see is Poland is the country that has been admired more than any other country in terms of a shift of perception over this past year. And undoubtedly, it's because of their opening of the doors to more than 4 million refugees. My overall conclusion is what it is that we see is that there are divisions within everybody's own countries. And we certainly see that in the United States, but many other countries are having this great division. The war in Ukraine has further divided the world as well. And I think it's a fascinating part of the overall observations that we have from the 2022 Best Countries data.
Well, David Rimson, thank you very much indeed. That's a fascinating look through from a very sort of unique lens for 2022. As I say, it's been a tremendous partnership. Thank you very much indeed for your work on this year's study. We look forward to next year's as well. But for the moment, Professor David Ribstein, the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, I'm now thrilled, delighted, and I have to say amazingly humbled to be joined by Julie Mazur, who is the CEO of VMLY&R Ukraine. Julie, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and this is great honor for me to participate and to speak up.
Well, it's clearly been a traumatic year for Ukraine in more ways than I can imagine. Public opinion sort of across the globe has very much been behind Ukraine. And not surprisingly, we see in our BAV Best Countries ranking for 2022, Ukraine has moved up significantly in terms of how the country is rated. So going up 9 places. Now, that's small in terms of the light of the tragedy that's been going on in Ukraine, but clearly is an indication, do you not think, Julie, of how much the world is now behind Ukraine?
Thank you for your question. You're right. In the BAV survey of 2022, Ukraine has improved some important factors such as social purpose and power. But some others dropped dramatically. Country for life, for example, and that's for obvious reason. I assume jumping in 9 places is a clear indication that Ukraine is in the people's mind around the world. People do really consider that Ukraine's struggle for the right thing, and the war in Ukraine is the fight for good.
Julie, it's quite interesting because one of the strongest attributes that we now see for Ukraine is politically influential. President Zelensky, has risen from a popular comedian to an inspiring figure, not just in Ukraine, but on the world stage. And he's surprised many of us in that sort of journey. Is that also true of the people of Ukraine? Are they surprised by what they see from President Zelensky?
It's a great question, and let me try to reply. And I will reply with a quote of French philosopher Joseph de Maistre, please. Every nation has the government it deserves. To reveal the phenomenon of the president, let's talk first about the phenomenon of the Ukrainian people. For example, how long did everyone predict that Russia will take over Ukraine? 3 days, they said. Is it possible to resist the second army of the world for the half a year having limited arms and resources? Or imagine, despite of the active war, 82% of enterprises in Ukraine continue operating during the war. And some industries, IT is a good example here, demonstrates even business growth. And even more, Ukrainian farmers have sought the entire zone area free from hostilities. Sought literally under the shelling. Teachers who continued to teach pupils until the end of the school year, often from the bomb shelters. And there is a story about professor who continued to read Ukrainian history course to his students from the front line, between the battles. And such a nation elected such a president, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president who refused to be evacuated together with his family, who replied to the proposal. The fight is here. I need an ammunition, not a right. He said to the enemy, as you attack, it will be our faces you see, not our backs. And he is a worthy representative of Ukrainian nation that elected him. And referring to your question, you're right. Before the war, some part of Ukrainian society was quite skeptical about Zelensky as a strong political figure. We could hear some criticism about his actions and his agreements on international arena. However, after the invasion began, he managed to unite the entire society, the military and the political forces in the fight against the war. And this transformation of the president actor into the leader of nation will be included in the textbooks of the Ukrainian history.
An amazing way of putting that. Thank you very much indeed. You know, cometh the hour, cometh the person. Now, it's not surprising, I suppose, when we look, and you made reference to it, at some of the way in which some of the dimensions for Ukraine have changed. We've seen sort of some drops in quality of life and economic stability, those dimensions being the hardest hit for Ukraine. Can you just give me, and all of us watching, a sense of the current morale of the Ukrainian people? Is it still hope or is it despair?
Thank you for asking. Hope or despair? It's a difficult question. War is a terrible thing, which you cannot associate with yourself, at least in a peaceful time, never. And of course, when you watch it from the outside, being far away, you can only imagine either despair or hope. And yes, despair, hopelessness, own impotence, fear. Many houses have been destroyed. The cities have been wiped off the face of the earth. Civilians have been killed and people that miraculously survived. And the question, how to exist further, is no more philosophical. It's truly practical. And that's true. And hope, this is a basic emotion. Each and every Ukrainian citizen believes that everything will be over soon. and life in the country will continue as it used to be before the invasion. But thanks to the war, other qualities stood out in the character of Ukrainians, and this changed the initial setup dramatically. Now, the only single paradigm in society is Ukraine will definitely win. Russia will not steal our lands, our identity, and our future. And our victory is our own responsibility. And each one of the Ukrainian people should bring their own contribution to the victory. Ukrainian society is united as never before. And this provides a unique chance to Ukraine to defeat the enemy and build successful democratic state in our future. Slava Ukraini!
Well, Julie, as I said when I introduced you, I'm very humbled and feel very emotional about this conversation. Thank you very much indeed. You might be away from us physically, but not emotionally. You're certainly in my heart and my prayers and the heart and prayers of many people watching this. So we thank you. We thank all of our WPP colleagues in Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You are indeed an inspiration to us all. Julie Mazur, the CEO of VMLY&R in Ukraine, thanks very much indeed.
And actually, thank you also WPP, because nowadays in really hard times, it's really like miracle, and we really appreciate the support which we got from WPP and we are still getting. Thank you, WPP and people in WPP.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.
Well, I'm very delighted now to be joined by Lord Jim O'Neill, the former chief economist of Goldman Sachs and a former government UK minister and chairman of Chatham House. Jim, Lord O'Neill, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
President Zelensky has said that the price we have to pay for avoiding a third world war is going to be higher energy bills, increases in the cost of living, and a reduction in living standards. And this comes at a time where we see from our BAV Best Country study that softer values, sort of like quality of life and social purpose, are much more important in defining a nation's brand. But do you think that public opinion at the moment will pressurize governments to hold their current policies, or do you think they will start to look at alternatives?
Nice, easy question that you start with. I don't know, because it is probably for my generation, never mind the younger generation, the first such issue of this scale and complexity that we've seen. So far, it appears Western nations, who are the prime supporters of Ukraine, of course, have been happy to support the government stance on Ukraine and superficially accept the cost, which is essentially this enormous cost of living shock. But it remains to be seen how that passes the test of time. So as we're seeing here, the government itself is almost definitely going to have to pay for the cost of this dilemma. I can't help finishing my answer to this very tricky question by also pointing out that if we really want to be serious about climate change and alternative energies, having a permanently higher price for carbon emitting energy forms is probably ultimately the sort of thing that is needed. One would imagine accelerate the desire for alternative energies to become more and more part of everyday life.
Now, you were chairman of the Chatham House, one of the world's leading think tanks. Its mission of a world that is sustainable, secure, and prosperous is great. What do you feel? How far are we from realizing that goal?
Isn't and hasn't really worked the way it's supposed to do on the tin.
So Jim, what should the priorities of nations be then now?
Yeah. So to what should we do about it? You know, I've become linked to a number of things I've been involved in. A big believer in what I broadly call profit with purpose, and we need to have business itself think more about the societal remit of who ultimately they serve. We've lived in an era, and still do, of where the only thing that matters for many, certainly publicly quoted business, is the shareholder. And it's not enough. And private business shouldn't be rewarded if we don't have productivity that goes with these big gains for them. And policymakers need to be more alert to the realities of life rather than just what was in economic textbooks of the 1960s and 70s. And if we don't learn from that, I have a fear that some of the dilemmas that have just blown up dramatically in the past few years out of nowhere could actually get worse.
Now, we started with a hard question, so let's end with an easy one. Lord O'Neill, are you an optimist or a pessimist given the situation we see around the world today?
Right now, I feel a lot more pessimistic than I've done for a long time. However, that said, I've been around the policy area in many different forms for over 40 years, and I've lived through a lot of crises. And the one thing I know for sure is that the crisis you're in, even though it often seems the worst you've ever been through, they come to an end. And one of the big things I've learned is never let a crisis go to waste. And indeed, the making of a business, a leader, or of a country is how they respond to the crisis you are in, because it normally defines how you're going to deal with the future era. So in that sense, there are lots of ways of things that could emerge from all of this mess in a more positive way.
Well, Lord Jim O'Neill, ending on a slightly more positive note than we started, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been a privilege to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, joining you.
Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by John Keaveney, who is the person responsible for the 2022 Best Country study. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, I'd just like to say personally a fantastic thanks for all of your work and the work of your team for the 2022 study. And I'm sure everybody who's been watching the broadcast will want to thank you as well.
Thank you.
John, looking back at this year, last year, couple of years worth of the study, what would you say from your expert viewpoint the contribution of analysing countries as brands has been?
Thank you, David, for having me. I think there's three main takeouts I would like to tell the audience. Firstly, our data shows that countries can be viewed as brands, which might be a surprise to some, meaning the same rules that control consumer brands can also be applied to countries. So, for example, the need for differentiation, the need to stand out, the importance of reputation, and the importance of an image and associations linked to a country. On that point, we've also found that stereotypes will dominate a country's image if not carefully and consciously managed. Now, I don't mean just using tourism advertising, which is still important, but maybe other activities which can be used to help build an image. For example, the management of what products, services, or industries fly your flag abroad. Finally, which might be a surprise to many, is that perceptual-based imagery traits can be linked to rational GDP levels, not just current imagery, but forecasted GDP levels as well.
And I suppose that last point, John, is really where the rubber meets the road in a sense. It's those sort of softer values, people might characterise them as softer values, meeting those very, very hard economic metrics of GDP growth.
It's very counterintuitive, but in many areas of life, we can see sometimes perception dominates reality, and countries are no different.
Well, thank you very much for those insights. They're just a few of the insights that we have for you for the 2022 study. But let's take a look now at 7 key takeaways from the BAV Best Country Study 2022.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look.
So, David, in terms of those 7 insights, the first one is that soft power drives GDP, not banks and tanks. We can see the quality of life is now the #1 driver in 2022, while power has dropped to 9th place. The second insight is the rise of social purpose in defining a country's success. Last year, it was the 5th most important driver, now 4th, and it's actually up 10% more than any other major driver. Next, cultural influence is the #1 driver, not only for tourism, but also business investment decisions as well. The 4th insight is that consumer brands impact perceptions of a country's culture abroad, especially in the developing world. The 5th insight is that a product is made in matters more than you would actually think. And finally, business investment, product consideration, and tourism consideration are intrinsically linked.
Well, John, thank you very much indeed. Each of those 7 insights, an absolute gem. And thanks once again for your amazing contribution to Best Countries for 2022. And of course, you can get many more insights, not just on a general level, but also on a country-specific level by downloading our BAV Metaverse experience. And the details of that will be given to you a little bit later on. Well, I'm afraid that's almost it for this year. We're almost at the end of our broadcast. A gigantic thanks to all my guests for their insights and our production team here in the studio, as well as the BAV team and our partners, Wharton Business School and US News. Be sure to explore the BAV Best Countries Metaverse. From me, David Roth, WPP, thank you very much indeed for watching, and please do get in touch if we can help. And I leave you with a countdown from the 85th to the #1, Best Country, Switzerland. Congratulations to all.